So two witnesses. I've changed the graphics. So from now onwards, you would see this new graphics for the presentations. And today's, we would continue our study on Babylon. Now, last time we studied as Babylon as a kingdom, as a city-state, and we saw the magnificence of that city-state or a kingdom of Babylon. And in fact, that kingdom has several kings, or you can say emperors, that went through one after other. The whole dynasties were progressing. And towards the end of Babylon as a kingdom, we have one famous or infamous king or emperor called Nebuchadnezzar. So Nebuchadnezzar is one of the most important kings of Babylon. In fact, during his reign, Babylon accomplished its heights, the highest glory and most powerful part and position were given during the reign of Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar was a ruthless man, is very focused on his goals, and is a smart man, and he knows how to conquer other nations, but how to subdue them, both by military prowess as well as very diplomatic. He mostly uses the infrastructure of a conquered nation, and he uses complete infrastructure, even the royalty, the kings and queens, the families, he uses them, but he would make sure that they comply and to his orders, especially the taxes and tributes, those are not violated. So he kind of gives some freedom also to the conquered nations as long as they are loyal and pay tributes. So that was Nebuchadnezzar. And behind the man Nebuchadnezzar, we see hand of God, God the Father, and Jesus Christ, his son. Now, Jesus Christ manages the rising of nations and falling of nations, and he supernaturally guides the whole history of mankind as the history progresses. So he would see or make a nation raise and become a big empire, while he will also work on most powerful empires and slowly bring them down, perhaps bring them to the ground so that God's purposes are fulfilled. So a drama is being enacted. And here, Nebuchadnezzar, when we come to him, God himself told him that he is giving every nation into his hands. In the sense, not every nation on the earth, but all the known inhabited world, all the powerful kingdoms were given into his hands. So he ruled everybody else. And when God is engineering all these things behind him, now he is during his life, during his reign as a king/emperor in Babylon, he was most powerful human being on the face of the earth. That was the status of Nebuchadnezzar. Now, if you take US president or Russian President Putin or Chinese President Xi, they are less powerful, much less powerful than Nebuchadnezzar. Because Nebuchadnezzar, there are no constitutional checks for him. There is no Senate that he has to answer for. There is no communist committees that he is responsible for and answers to. in China and Russia. So here, an unchecked monarch, a dictator, and a despot, the Nebuchadnezzar. The Babylon reached its highest peak in its history, both in terms of glory as well as the power and 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 everything that man wants is there in Babylon during Nebuchadnezzar. They are well fed. Everywhere there is abundance and there is luxury. And there is also when you have your stomach full and when you don't have worries about tomorrow because the food was guaranteed because of well-laid irrigation system, and there is well protected country because it is surrounded by waters of Euphrates, and Euphrates protected from any serious enemy attacks. So they enjoyed a good long period of peace under Nebuchadnezzar. So they have peace. There's no anxiety about external foreign attacks, and there is no worry about food. And they have every best thing from the entire world because they were so rich and so good at with riches and money. They could import anything and everything. So there is abundance, there is luxury. On top of this, Nebuchadnezzar also has a taste for the gardens, and we will shortly see, as the historians recorded, at the request of his wife, he built gardens, huge gardens, and the gardens actually became one of the 8 wonders of ancient world, the hanging gardens of Babylon. So that was pinnacle of Babylon. And God, when he raised Nebuchadnezzar into this prominent position, unheard of and unseen in the history of mankind, the whole power and wealth and everything concentrated in one human being. One human being. He was elevated above every other human being through this Babylon. Babylon was the superpower of the day. That was sole superpower as long as Nebuchadnezzar was in power. Now, here comes the catch. God takes the most powerful man, most mighty, he has everything. Now, he shakes him up and tells him, you can't be proud. Remember that it is me, God, who created you, who created the earth, created all the nations and kingdoms. You cannot rebel against me, and whatever I will, that will be accomplished. And he gives a big, huge lesson to Nebuchadnezzar. And Nebuchadnezzar, as other Babylonians, have this pride and this power. And he took great pride in the Babylon that he built. And one day he was walking in the corridors and he saw this mighty Babylon. And he said, like, is it not what my hands made? And an angel answers, the kingdom has departed from you. And he was turned into an animal. Like, he still has his brain working, but his hands and his feet became like a beast, and the nails grew, and he became partly insane, even though he remembered. And for few months he goes into oblivion. So the Babylonian uh, leaders, the top core leadership, they hide the fact that Nebuchadnezzar has gone astray. Insane he has become, and he has become like beast, and he dwelled with other animals. And then after he repents, and a set period of time, God restores his sanity and turns him back into a human being. And then Nebuchadnezzar regains his sanity and praises God of heaven and God of earth. There's a famous speech he writes to every emperor that would come after him. Make sure that you fear God, because there's a God who judges everybody, including the mighty man like me, the Nebuchadnezzar. So today we will be going through Nebuchadnezzar from a historian's point of view. The historians, they visited Babylon, and we learn more about Nebuchadnezzar. And subsequent presentations, we will come to how God struck him down with insanity. So we will briefly touch the insanity part, the judgment on Nebuchadnezzar, but we will just explore the, the magnificence and the luxury of Babylon. These are foundations for us to understand Babylon as a code name. So let's launch into the presentation. So this is the woman. She is spiritual Babylon. She is riding a beast with 7 heads and 10 horns and 10 crowns upon its 10 horns. So she is drunken with the blood of saints and martyrs of Jesus. Revelation 17 and 18. And she's called Mystery Babylon the Great, mother of harlots and abominations of earth. So she's religious party and the beast is political party. So the church and state, but they collude to kill the Christians. That is the basic, very high level take on Mystery Babylon. And we went to the ancient Babylon because they are all shadows of this spiritual Babylon. So we are going through the physical shadow instances of Babylon. So we started our first study with Babel, Tower of Babel, and then we came to Babylon as a kingdom, city-state kingdom. And today we are focusing on one of its greatest emperors, not one of its greatest emperor of Babylon, that is Nebuchadnezzar. So this is Tower of Babel, and we have different views, and looks like a pyramid. And this is Babylonia. There's huge walls are surrounded, and Euphrates surrounds it. And then it's all square. It's a big square, and you have squares within squares and squares. It's an artistic view. Then we have another artistic rendition, and it's big. And if you missed last presentation, I would recommend you to watch it. We have 2 videos, and this is Nebuchadnezzar's image, archaeological findings. Nobody is 100% sure that this was a picture of Nebuchadnezzar, but this is what was widely believed. And here is an artistic rendition of Nebuchadnezzar in his palace. And he was turned into a beast for some temporarily to bring him to senses. Even though you might think that you are ultimate, you are not. God is ultimate. That lesson was given to Nebuchadnezzar. So he turned something like this, a beast. His hair grew. So this is again artistic interpretation. And hanging gardens of Babylon. This is the technicalities of the hanging gardens. They would erect platforms like this, one smaller than the previous one, and they fill dirt, and even the columns are hollow and they fill the dirt so that bigger trees, they have roots can grow into the hollow columns. And they planted the whole trees and shrubs and then they have a mechanism for the water to be lifted from the canal. The canals would flow at the bottom ground level. So they have machinery to lift the water and feed to every level. So they were all lush green. For a viewer far away from this structure, for him, it looks, he doesn't see the root or base of the trees because you have some walls, like parapet wall surrounding them. What all you see is the tree's top portion or second half, the top half of the trees, and they tend to bend. So for a viewer, he would have that illusion that the trees were hanging down from top. So that is the illusion that earned the name called Hanging Gardens of Babylon, one of the ancient wonders. So this is basic structure, and we have other artistic renderings. So we have various imagery of Babylon, and then you have the trees, everything is hanging. So there's another rendition. So magnificent, so beautiful, probably very fragrant, flowers, shrubs, everything that he can lay hold of from the entire world, he could get it. The most powerful man on earth around that time, Nebuchadnezzar, and his hanging gardens of Babylon. There's another view of hanging gardens of Babylon. Let's start with the secular history during Nebuchadnezzar's time. So Babylon reached its peak, its prime of glory and luxuries. And from God's point of view, it is vanity, it's pride, and the arrogance and the rebellion. And it's negatively described from God by biblical writers, while the Babylonians viewed themselves differently. Most successful people, most wealthy people, most powerful people. So there is a dichotomy of what man thinks of himself compared to what God thinks of him or them. So let's see the secular history, few points, very interesting. The new palace, he built a new palace just by Nebuchadnezzar. New palace built by Nebuchadnezzar was prodigious in size and superb in embellishments, ornaments, embellishments. Its outer wall embraced 6 miles. The palace, the whole compound complex of palace is 6 miles outer wall. Imagine how much land he needs just for himself and his family for the royal palace. Within that circumference, there were 2 other embattled walls beside a great tower. So you have series of walls surrounding the palace. So perhaps for protection. 3 brazen gates led into the grand area, and every gate of consequence throughout the city was of brass. So brass, I don't know, for some unknown reasons, they have brazen or brass gates. So 3 gates, primary gates, well guarded entry to the palace. The palace was splendidly decorated. This is by historians. These writings of historians who visited Babylon. So the palace was splendidly decorated with the statues of men and animals, with vessels of gold and silver, and furnished with luxuries of all kinds brought thither from the conquests in Egypt, Palestine, and Tyre. So when we say Palestine, it includes Judea. So the Babylonian armies would go and invade and capture, subjugate the kingdoms, and bring all the good things, all the luxurious things, all the artifacts back to Babylon. Its greatest boast were the hanging gardens. See, the hanging gardens was its greatest boast, which acquired even from Grecian writers. The Greek writers also talked about these hanging gardens. Writers, the appellation of one of the wonders of the world. They are attributed to the gallantry of Nebuchadnezzar. So it's all his vision, his brainchild, who constructed them in compliance with a wish of his queen Amytis to possess elevated groves such as she had enjoyed on the hills around her native Ekbatana. So the queen came from a different country, and that has hills, but she has longing for that kind of beauty, hills and the greenery. So Babylon is a plain, so you can't have that. So at her request, he creates mountains of mud. Babylon was all flat, and to accomplish so extravagant a desire, an artificial mountain was reared or raised 400 feet on each side. It's a pretty tall 400 feet, while terraces, one above another, rose to a height that overtopped the walls of the city, that is above 300 feet in elevation. So the outer walls of Babylon were about 300 feet high, but the hanging gardens were 400 feet. So even from outside of Babylon, people can have a view of these hanging gardens. Continuing, the ascent from the terrace to terrace was made by corresponding flights of steps. It's again spiral steps, while the terraces themselves were raised to their various stages on ranges of regular piers, which, forming a kind of vaulting, rose in succession, one over the other, to the required height of each terrace, the whole being bound together by a wall of 22 feet in thickness. These are very similar to diagrams we saw. They have different piers and different terraces. The level of each terrace or garden was then formed in the following manner. The top of the piers was first laid over with flat stones, 16 feet in length and 4 feet in width. On these stones were spread beds of matting, then a thick layer of bitumen, after which came two courses of bricks, which were covered with the sheets of solid lead. The earth was heaped on this platform. The earth means the dirt in US language. The dirt was heaped on this platform, and in order to admit the roots of the large trees, prodigious hollow pillars or piers were built and filled with mold. From the Euphrates, which flowed close to the foundation, water was drawn up by machinery. It's a very fascinating. They have technology to lift up water. The whole, says Curtis, this is one of the historians, had, to those who saw it from a distance, the appearance of woods or trees overhanging the mountains. So they were overhanging or upside down. Such was the completion of Nebuchadnezzar's work. When he found himself at rest in his house and flourished in his palace. So that was the greatness and grandeur of Nebuchadnezzar and his Babylon. The king spoke and said, "Is not this great Babylon that I have built for the house of the kingdom by the mighty might of my power and the honor of my majesty?" So he failed to give glory to God. He took all the glory and all the power to himself, to lift himself, even after warning from God. That is the reason God has to bring him to senses that you are just a man, you are not God. You are just a mortal, even though you are most powerful man. on the face of the earth, still you are subjected to my authority, my rules. I am greater than you in everything, either wealth or honor or power. So, with my great power, I would subdue you and shake you down and bring you to senses so that you would not lift yourself against God, nor any other emperor or presidents, prime ministers that follow you throughout the history of mankind. So, here the voice of God is bringing us a, a story and this portraying spiritual reality of God's judgment on every proud being, every haughty person, every cruel person who cares only for the pleasures, no regard for God or his commandments. He would surely be brought to judgment. But those who fear God, you have other kings, we have other kings in Bible who feared God, they reign very well, and God did not denounce them. So the fear of God is the key. Don't exploit people. Don't terrorize people. Help poor. Serve the interests of the poor. Everybody in your kingdom. So God is God of justice and God of mercy, God of fairness. When these fundamental things are violated and the emperors and the dictators try to subjugate people, then the judgment surely comes. Here we see also sovereignty of God, that he intervenes even in Babylon. Even Babylon, that God rejecting Babylon, who lifts and exalts himself or herself, even that entity would be subjected to God's authority, sovereignty, and God's justice and judgment. See a few scriptures, Daniel 4, verse 29, the pride and boasting of Babylon. At the end of 12 months, this is after prophet Daniel and comes and tells him to change his ways. At the end of the 12 months, he walked in the palace. He is Nebuchadnezzar, walked in the palace of the kingdom of Babylon. The king spoke and said, is not this great Babylon that I have built for the house of the kingdom by the might of my power and for the honor of my majesty? So his self exaltation, lifting up of himself. Continuing, Daniel 4, verse 31. While the word was in the king's mouth, there fell a voice from heaven saying, O King Nebuchadnezzar, to thee it is spoken, the kingdom is departed from thee, and they shall drive thee from men, and thy dwelling shall be with the beasts of the field. They shall make thee to eat grass as oxen, and 7 times or 7 years shall pass over thee until you know that the Most High, that is God, rules in the kingdom of men and giveth it to whomsoever he will. So Jesus Christ would be changing the leaders, changing the kingdoms. He will cause one kingdom to rise and another kingdom to diminish. It's the work of God. Continuing, Daniel 4, verse 33. The same hour was the thing fulfilled upon Nebuchadnezzar, and he was driven from men and did eat grass as oxen, and his body was wet with the dew of heaven, till his hairs were grown like eagle's feathers, and his nails like bird's claws. We will revisit this chapter in the couple of presentations in future. We will continue the historians' writings, what they wrote for us about Nebuchadnezzar's Babylon. Continuing, Nowhere could the king have taken so comprehensive a view of the city he had so magnificently constructed and adorned as when walking on the highest terrace of the gardens of his palace. So here the historians were thinking that he's at the topmost terrace of the hanging gardens of Babylon. So he has an aerial view of the whole magnificent gardens plus the whole Babylon. At that time, probably Nebuchadnezzar thought to himself, is this not Babylon that I built with my might for my glory? Me. Babylon, as the center of a great kingdom, was the seat of boundless luxury. This is what happens when a nation is subjected to boundless luxury. Let me read this again. Babylon, as the center of a great kingdom, was the seat of boundless luxury, and its inhabitants were notorious for their addiction to self indulgence and effeminacy. Effeminacy, you can say LGBTEQ, they already have that. And then self indulgence, that's food, drink, and every kind of perversion. And again, this historian Curtis asserts that nothing could be more corrupt than its morals, nothing more fitted to excite and allure to immoderate pleasures. So it's a pleasure loving people. That's what the historian is saying. And there's no comparison with any other kingdom or any other people. They're completely given over to the pleasure. No morals, no restraint. The rites of hospitality were polluted by the grossest and most shameless lusts. Money dissolved every tie, whether of kindred, respect, or esteem. They are very money oriented. Money mattered most, and money defined everything: the relationships, the respect, and the value and esteem of a person, all dependent on how much money you have. There are no natural affections. The Babylonians were very greatly given to the wine. So here is the problem: wine and the enjoyments which accompany inebriety. So women were present at their convivialities, first with some degree of propriety, but growing worse and worse by degrees, they ended by throwing off at once their modesty and their clothing. So you can imagine the society, Babylonian society, and the culture and the lewdness. Once in her life, according to Herodotus, every native female was obliged to visit temple of Mylitta, the Babylonian Astarte or Venus, and there receive the embraces of the first stranger who threw a piece of money into her lap, an abominable custom that is alluded to in Apocrypha, so Baruch 6:43 and Strabo. So even the extra biblical literature recorded these bad, evil customs of Babylonians. So every native female, every immigrant, every slave was subjected to these sexual perversions and exploitations. On the ground of their awful wickedness, the Babylonians were threatened with condign punishment through the mouths of the prophets, and the tyranny with which the rulers of the city exercised their sway was not without a decided effect in bringing on them the terrific consequences of the divine vengeance. The divine vengeance, the vengeance from God Almighty that has come on these people. See the tyranny of Babylonian rulers. They were extremely terrifying, terror to the people. They can subjugate people with terror. So all these things are against God's nature, God's love, God's fairness, God's justice, God's peace loving, God's way of loving one another. All these things are pushed aside. Since you have money, wealth, power, and ruthlessness, and you have missionary, and you have luxury, no anxiety. That is the ripe condition for the fallen human nature to shoot itself out, bringing divine wrath, wrath of God. No wonder we see consistently wrath of God is poured double, poured without any dilution on every occurrence of Babylon. Continuing the writing of historians, nor in the whole range of literature is there anything to be found approaching to the sublimity, the force and terror with which Isaiah and others, Isaiah the prophet and others speak on this painful subject. So here, McClintock and Strong, Cyclopedia, they gave few verses that God's prophets wrote against Babylon and this kind of behavior. Babylon even stands, therefore, in the New Testament, Revelation 17:5, as the type of the most shameless profligacy and idolatry. So I want to quickly see these verses, which McClintock and Strong Cyclopedia refer to. Isaiah 14:11, that's the first one. Thy pomp, this is again talking about Babylon, thy pomp is brought down to the grave, and the noise of thy viols. The worm is spread under thee, and the worms cover thee. So this is how God's judgment is coming. They have no clue that judgment would come. Then Isaiah 47:1. Come down and sit in the dust, O virgin daughter of Babylon. Sit on the ground, and there is no throne. O daughter of Chaldeans, for thou shalt no more be called tender and delicate. So to see the language of God's judgment. You were like that, but you would be made like this. This is the language. Jeremiah 51, verse 39. In their heart I will make their feasts, and I will make them drunken, that they may rejoice and sleep a perpetual sleep and not wake, said the Lord. Here is a scary language. It's a serious language. They will sleep a perpetual sleep. They die. I will bring death upon Babylon. That's what God is saying. Daniel 5, verse 1. In their Belshazzar, the king made a great feast to the 1,000 of his lords and drank wine before the 1,000. So this is the last point in the history of Babylon when it is taken over by Persians. In that night, everybody drank. Nobody was in and their senses. Soldiers, commanders, army, royalty, soothsayers, everybody was so drunk, and it was so easy for Persians to capture. And that is the end of Babylon. So that brings us to the end of the presentation. We would go through all these chapters, Isaiah 13 and 11, and Isaiah 47, and one more chapter, Jeremiah 50, 51. These all talk about Babylon in greatest details. So they all revolve around Nebuchadnezzar's Babylon from scripture's point of view. How God sees and looks at Babylon, that's very important for us to learn. That is subsequent presentations. I will stop sharing and we will open the room for